Thank you very much. How many here have read or studied Hayek at all? Just show me your hands. Okay, so a good number of you have read him. I wrote a book on Hayek called F.A. Hayek, Economics, Political Economy, and Social Philosophy. It's an attempt to try to communicate Hayek's main ideas to a professional audience of economists. The book did pretty well, and on the basis of that, the Oxford University Press asked me to write what is called a very short introduction. Oxford publishes these little pamphlets. They're 100 pages, 120 pages, that are short introductions to a variety of different topics. And so I was asked to do the one on Hayek. I am writing that book with a colleague of mine, Scott King, and we finished the first draft of it. It was circulated here if you want to read it. And it is we're doing the revisions right now and trying to get it out by the end of the year or the beginning of next year for publication in there. The very short introductions are a great resource for you if you haven't looked at them on any topic. They're massive, the numbers. So just go to online to Oxford University Press, very short introductions, and you'll see the whole list of them. Um, One of the things that we didn't want to do is write a biography of Hayek. There's a great biography on Hayek that's being done by Bruce Caldwell, who's a professor at Duke, and the biography is published with the University of Chicago. The first volume is out. It's called Hayek: A Life, and it covers Hayek's birth from 1899 to 1950. And now they will cover the second half of Hayek's life from 1950 to 1992. And the first thing that I think that shows is that we're talking about an individual who made scientific contributions in each of the decades from 1920 to 1990. His last book, The Fatal Conceit, is published in 1990. He dies in 1992. And Hayek made contributions across many different fields. So economics, political science, law, history, philosophy. Did I mention philosophy already? Philosophy, and also psychology. And he ended up by making a contribution to anthropology. So we have an individual who has spanned an entire century of writing, 8 decades in which he's contributing to the literature. And he has spread across, depending on how you count it, 8 or 9 fields in which he, reached exceeding competency. He is won the Nobel Prize in economics and won pretty much every other honor that you can imagine, including medals of freedom and all kinds of honors like that. So what we didn't want to do is do a biography about Hayek because Bruce Caldwell's already doing that. There's others, biographies that you can read as well that are more easy reading than the multi-volume work of Caldwell. But what we wanted to do was try to capture Hayekian ideas and show that Hayekian ideas still have evolutionary potential for you as young scientists. So in many ways, this talk is pitched as if each of you are going to become a professional economist and you want to learn and study from one of the great economists of the 20th century how you might do economics in the 21st century. I realize that might not be true, but that's how the book is pitched, and that's how the talk is pitched in that regard. But the main idea is first and foremost to try to demonstrate the evolutionary potential of Hayek's ideas in the social sciences and the humanities for today. So the long arc of Hayek's career, which I'll go over in a second, is important to keep in mind, but that's not the purpose of the exercise. The purpose of the exercise in going through the long arc is to try to cull from that constant lifelong learning process of Hayek's what you can do when you take his ideas and make them your own. So it's really an invitation for you to take a set of ideas and run with them wherever you might take them. None of us that practice science today know where science will be tomorrow. And so it's really up to you. You're the future of science. Um, I'm 66 years old. Hopefully, I have several decades left of writing. I have projects I want to do. I hope that those projects can have an impact. And I still think that I, can come up with new ideas or whatever. But the nature of science is for the next generation to always be pushing out the frontiers. Earlier today, I showed a video from a TV show which is a documentary TV show called The Ascent of Man. And it features Jacob Bernowski, who is a great scientist. And he's talking about the nature of science, and he's talking about the nature of science inside of the scenery is inside the concentration camp Auschwitz. And he's contrasting the nature of science versus the nature of dogmatism. All right. And his argument is that science is a tribute to what we can know despite the fact that we are fallible. Science is a tribute to what we know despite the fact that we are fallible. And so one of the things to keep in mind in all of this is that what we as science educators are hoping to do is to excite the minds of the young students that are in our classroom about the wonders of the science that we're studying, so that they may, in fact, take ownership over those studies and push the science in new directions. Because the reality is, in the growth of knowledge, the more we know we don't know. Right? Knowledge grows like a sphere. And inside the sphere is the knowledge that we know. On the outer edges of that sphere is the knowledge that we don't know. So none of us can tell you what the future of science is going to be. But the process by which that grows, that's like fascinating. And it should enlist your curiosity. And Hayek was one of those examples of someone who was a lifelong learner. That's why he went in all those different disciplines, because he was constantly searching for something that was beyond his grasp. He didn't have all the answers fixed, right? Instead, it was an invitation to keep pushing out those ideas and thinking about the implications of it. But it wasn't just a random walk, like I'm interested in this today, I'm interested in that today, tomorrow, or whatever. There's a kind of a coherence in his program, which confronted with the forces of other scientists and the world outside of them, both of which are shaping what you consider interesting, right? In face of all of those forces, there's something that's united about the question that he wants to ask. And that is, how can we have cooperation without central command? How is it even possible? Right? So these how possible questions are the ones that drive you mad. All right? And a lot of times it's hard for you to see them because you've already exist inside of them. So you're like a fish in water and you don't recognize that it's a puzzle that's happening. So, just any of you right now, like, look at the coat that you're wearing or the shoes that you're wearing and ask yourself, where the hell did they come from? How did they get produced? Who were all the people that produced those shoes or produced those coats? How many people from all over the world contribute even just a small part to be able to produce those goods and services you take for granted? So the mystery of economics is the mystery of the mundane. We're already experiencing this, but the problem is that the puzzle is that there wasn't a red phone to God. What's your name? Javier. There wasn't a red phone to God that God said, Javier needs, a pair of white Nikes in 2026, size 10. I don't know. Right? And therefore, when Javier went up to the store, he said, hi, I'm Javier. And they said, oh, here's your shoes. Right? It was the mystery of all of this is that he's looking around for shoes. He might as well have had like Reeboks. He could have had, whatever, other kind of shoes, Pumas, Adidas, whatever. But he ended up by choosing the Nikes or whatever, and they were there in his size. And it wasn't like he had to wait forever for them. He did something very simple. He took some pieces of paper or a card and said, here, and they gave them here, and they both said, thank you, thank you, thank you. And he walked away. How the hell did that even happen? Like, we don't, our normal intuition is that we must have a boss that dictates everything. And so Hayek is trying to pursue that question all the way from the beginning of his career in the 1920s to the end of his career in the 1990s. And what I'm trying to do in this book is summarize the ideas that developed in that and how they may relate to the way you do economics in the year 2030, 2035, 2040. Okay? And so that's what we're, trying to accomplish in the book. So both the constant evolution of his ideas and its relevance and the coherence of those ideas. So this is, if I have the slides behind me, so I can't really see them, but I think this is the arc of Hayek's career. Is that correct? Yeah. So what this does is one of the things that's important about Hayek. Remember what I said, that there was external forces, which is the world out the window, and then there was internal forces, which is the scientific discourse that's taking place in the field of economics and political economy. So external to the world, you have to remember, is that Hayek is writing economics in the background context of World War I, Great Depression, World War II, Cold War. Okay? You cannot, he's a social scientist. Every social scientist during that period is facing those same external factors, and they're trying to wrestle with them. One of the biggest ones of that, I mentioned Cold War, but you have to realize that in the interwar period between World War I and World War II, as well as the Great Depression, they were faced with a totalitarian threat, but both the left and the right. Right? So totalitarianism was something they live with every single day of their lives. Civilization was at stake. And so how do I, as a social scientist, think through that world? At the same time, you have a bunch of different trends in science going on. You have technological advances that make different types of science now possible that previously weren't possible. Right? One of which is, computing power, right? That's evolving along this way as well. And so, Hayek is embroiled in these debates. So he starts his career as an economist. And by that, I mean a very technical economist. So I don't know how you've been introduced to Hayek or whatever, but let's work backwards. He's a Nobel Prize winner in 1976, 74. In 1931, he is given the chair, the most prestigious chair at the London School of Economics. He's 32 years old. When I was a graduate student, there used to be a t-shirt that went around, 2 t-shirts when I was in graduate school, one of which relates to this auditorium, I'll tell you in a second. But the 2 t-shirts, the first one was a Hayek, and it had a picture of Hayek, and it said, I was 25 years old when I wrote Monetary Theory and the Trade Cycle. How old were you? He was 25 years old and he wrote an international classic in economics, technical economics. Okay? The other t-shirt was Milton Friedman. It was a little picture of Milton Friedman, and it had the quantity theory of money, MV equals PQ, and it said, with this equation, I have conquered. But Hayek was a superstar in economics. And when Keynes died, Hayek turned to his wife and said, I'm now the world's most famous economist. And that actually wasn't like crazy talk. But Hayek had a weird fate that happened to him. He was among the most prestigious economists in the world And then he wasn't, because people thought he lost 2 debates. He lost a debate with Keynes. How many have seen the Keynes Hayek rap videos? Okay, over millions of people have watched these rap videos. So it's not like something like, a cult classic or whatever. There's millions and millions of views of these. All right, so he lost the debate with Keynes, and it so happens that he also, lost the debate in the eyes of the economics profession to the market socialists. And so he lost the 2 biggest debates of the 1930s in the interwar period. So famous in his early 30s, now all of a sudden not as respected as he once was. Not respect is the wrong word to turn it. People didn't think he was as right as he once was, okay? So Hayek, rather than conceding that he lost, never thought he lost. And so he then puzzles, like, why is it that people are not understanding what it is I'm trying to get across about the role of the price system, the role that money plays in a modern economy, the role that capital coordination takes place? And so, just very briefly, Hayek's main contributions in economics were to demonstrate how monetary manipulation can impinge on the investment behavior of individuals, creating boom and bust cycles. Those boom and bust cycles become more serious precisely because the investment of the capital goods is made up of heterogeneous goods with multi-specific purposes. Now, how many here have ever played with Legos? Raise your hand. How many of you have ever played with Play-Doh? Okay. Now imagine that you had to make a dinosaur out of Play-Doh. What do? Right? How do you make a dinosaur out of Legos? You got to put all these different pieces together. Imagine if you're doing that for a little one in your life, and you get done doing it, and the little one in your life says to you with the Play-Doh, "That doesn't look like a brontosaurus, it looks like a duck." What do? Start all over again. How about if you're trying to do it with Legos? You got to tear the whole thing apart and start from the beginning all over again. What are Legos made up of when you build a Lego thing? Heterogeneous, but multi-specific, goods, right? Because the Lego comes in the little round circle, it comes in the half moon, it comes in a square, it comes in a rectangle, right? And you have to constantly be putting it to different places. And so that requires you to do what? Follow instructions. You don't need any instructions with Play-Doh. Hayek's capital theory was Legos. Hayek's issue of investment were the instructions. Manipulation of money distorts the instructions, therefore leading to a boom and a bust. And during the bust, I have to tear all the Legos apart and then rebuild them afterwards. Other economists, because they were working with capital as Play-Doh, didn't see the problem of the manipulation of money and credit as significantly as Hayek did. And so his question is, why are they getting that wrong? They shouldn't get that wrong. We just had we're in the middle of the Great Depression. It's not like he was a theory in search of data. It was data in search of an explanation. We're sitting in the middle of an economic downturn. How the hell do we get there? Hayek is trying to tell us. The other economists didn't have an answer of how we got there, but yet everyone went along with the other economists. Market socialism, same way. Going back, what is the argument that comes out of Hayek and market socialism? Without private property and the means of production, there's no prices in the means of production. Without any prices in the means of production, the economic planner has no way to determine how to invest in the alternative production projects. Economic growth and development is a function of moving from the technologically feasible to the economically viable. Right? Our first point is technological feasibility. right? Right now, you commuted to get to campus here. You didn't do a, beam me up Scotty like Star Trek. Why? Because it's technologically not feasible for you to do that. So you got here, by public transportation, a car, or walking, or whatever you did, right? Bicycle, various different means. But it all had to be within the technologically feasible set. What economics asks is the further question, which is, among those technologically feasible sets, what are the most economically viable? And the economically viable is determined, right, by whether or not I produce more with less rather than less with more. How do I know that? Hayek's knowledge problem, which if you've read Hayek, you've been introduced. How do I know that? Well, in a market system, I know it because of the role that prices play and the role that profits play and the role losses play. So when our economics doesn't focus on property, prices, profits, and loss, we're going to lose something in our economics. When our economics focuses on aggregates and not individual decision making, we're going to lose something in our economics. So between 1931 and 1940, Hayek sees a tremendous amount of wisdom in economics being lost. So rather than the science pushing the frontiers out like this, the science was doing this. And he's asking himself, why did that happen? His unique answer of that time was that the reason why it happened was because we took a wrong turn philosophically. That philosophical wrong turn led us to choose the wrong models. The reason why those models are wrong is because they didn't take into account the institutional context within which economic processes work or the operation of those economic processes. So his career had to move from addressing technical economic questions to ones that talked about the philosophical foundations and the institutional framework within which economics takes place. And that's the second two parts behind you here. Third one is that when you get the institutions right, why is it so difficult to get them? And Hayek's argument is that our moral intuitions evolved over millennia for small group interactions. What happens is the Great Society demands us to have morality for large group. And there's a conflict between those two. The easiest way to think about it is to think about sharing norms. In a small group, let's say your family, you might have sharing norms. You can't apply those same sharing norms to society as a whole. All right, if you came downstairs for breakfast when you were a kid and your mom said to you, okay, $2 for an omelet, $1 for orange juice, you owe me $3. You would think like, what the hell is going on, Mom? So mom shares with you. She provides a dinner. But if you went over to the local diner for breakfast and you sat down and said, hey, Mom, when you bring me my omelet, they would look at you like you had three heads. So we have to learn to live, as Hayek put it, in two worlds at once. Our intimate order of our familiarity and the extended order of the Great Society. Okay, so we've now explained sort of this arc of his career in this regard. And the question is that what of the residue of his answers to those questions can then be utilized for us today when we think about them? And so one of the things that we do in the book is we try to talk about the relevance of Hayek and his ideas that are going on. And so, this is, sort of the big aspects of various different literatures. So Deirdre McCloskey is a famous economist. She was here, I think, 2 weeks ago. And she's written a trilogy of books called The Bourgeois Error. And she's trying to argue in the second volume of that, which is called the books are The Bourgeois Virtues, The Bourgeois Dignity, and The Bourgeois Equality. Okay? And what she's trying to explain is the hockey stick of human existence. So for most of human existence, we moved along like this and we were ensnared in poverty. And then the Industrial Revolution happens and we go like that. That's called the hockey stick of human progress. It's what drives economists, right? So how many of you, when you were a kid, watched the movie The Matrix? Right? Do you remember in the first beginning when Neo is discovered by Trinity? So Trinity goes to see him and they're in the nightclub and they're dancing and she whispers into her ear, Neo, it's the question that drives us, right? Because he's upset, right? Because he feels weird about, what's going on because he's really just a brain in a vat and instead he's experiencing things. So he's feeling disquiet. It's the question that drives us. This is what leads him to do that. For economists, this is the question that drives us. This year, we're celebrating the 250th anniversary next month of Adam Smith's An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. Why are some nations rich, other nations poor? Why are some nations that were poor became rich? And why is it that some nations that were rich became poor? How many here know that Argentina, from the period 1850 into the early parts of the 20th century, was one of the richest economies in the world? All right? Like fourth or higher richest in the world. Peronism comes in, they become one of the poorest. Right? New Zealand, right? New Zealand, the poorest of the OECD countries. They have Rogernomics. They end up by becoming one of the wealthiest in the OECD countries. Right? The miracle of Hong Kong. Right? India, post 1992. Right? We have all these examples around us. These are the questions that drive us. How is it that countries that were experiencing long bouts of poverty can have actual economic progress? So McCloskey wants to say that that's because we had a shift in our cultural mores, in the way we talk about one another, the way we talk about work to one another, the way we talk about giving it a go. Go and do something different than what everyone else had been doing before. Everyone plowed their fields this way, now you plow your fields that way. In the old days, when you did that, you got ostracized. Now all that happened to you is if you were wrong, you lost money. Nobody killed you, nobody chopped your head off. You had the right to give it a go. You had the right to say no when your betters tried to rule over you. So McCloskey triggers this hockey stick based on that shift in the language. Her second volume is The Bourgeois Dignity, and her argument is that modern economics cannot explain the miracle of modern economic growth, its most important question, precisely because it ignores this aspect of the way we talk to one another and the way we relate to one another. Again, the political, legal, social, and cultural mores are going to dictate how it is that economic life takes place. That mattered for Adam Smith, and it matters for us today. How that all comes about, that's part of the big relevance of Hayek. All right, that's part of the big relevance of Hayek. Another aspect of Hayek is the way the mind works, and so therefore the AI debates, Hayek touches on those. Hayek touches not only on the modern economic growth, but about major questions having to do with inequality. First time in human history, in 2015, did less than 10% of the world live in extreme poverty. How many of you have ever seen the documentary on Netflix called Living on Less Than $2 a Day? If you haven't seen it, so again, you should look it up. Listen, because you know why? Where do you think it's set? It's in Guatemala, right? It's actually in the rural parts of Guatemala. Extreme poverty, less than $2 a day. What would it be like to live in that kind of world? What's life expectancy? What's your health? All of these things matters a lot. In 2015 was the first time that less than 10% of the world's population was living in extreme poverty. When I was your age and sitting in the equivalent of your seats, do you know what that number was? It was 40% of the world's population was living in extreme poverty. Do you realize how many billions of people had to be escaped from a miserable existence of subsistence levels of living to move from 40% to less than 10%? And tell me something. How many poets, musicians, artists have you seen that have captured that miracle? Answer's very few, right? Miracles happen in front of our eyes and we don't even recognize it. We've improved the lot of billions of people and we don't even pay attention to it. Who pays attention to it? The people that are suffering, right? The least advantaged and most vulnerable among us are the ones that are left out of that issue. So we need to pay attention. We need to understand the rules under which we can produce more with less and generate economic growth and development. And so this is one of the issues that Hayek plays such a big role in, and what we hope to communicate in our book and explain the contemporary relevance of Hayek's ideas to economic science and the social science and humanities more in general. So the conclusion, and that will give us some time maybe for some questions if you are so inclined, or you can ask me any kind of questions having to do with the science. But what we try to argue in the book, remember that our goal is to influence young scientists to pursue the Hayekian ideas, methodology, analytics, to address the pressing problems that they're facing in the world today. So it's not about, my whole point about talking about World War I, Great Depression, World War II, the Cold War was not at all to talk about those particular things. It's just when you're talking about the evolution of ideas, you got to talk about what are the influences that impact that evolution. So there's forces that are happening from the outside of science, and there's forces happening on the inside of science. That's true today as well. But those ideas about how do I understand cooperation without central command? What is the central role that property, contract, and consent play? The stability of possession, the transference of those possessions by consent, the keeping of promises, and building that and embedding that in a rule of law as the foundation for an economic system, that's as relevant today as it was then or at the time of Adam Smith. But the way in which we understand and work with that idea is going to change based on the world that we live in today. Right? What about intellectual property rights? Right? See, there's all these puzzling questions. Right? So how do you think the LLMs work? Right? Technically, they're Bayesian updaters. That's all they are. They take in a bunch of information, confront it with a prompt, they update and learn. But how do you get them to be smart in the first place? You take all kinds of material and you load it into them. Where are they getting that material from? Science. Right? That's where they're getting it from. They're going to the library here. They got a bunch of scanned documents are available and they just load it in. Did anyone ask the scientists whether or not they could get loaded into the LLM? The answer, by the way, is no. Right? No. So now the question is that a good thing or a bad thing? Is that going to affect the future of science or not? By the way, there's lawsuits going on right now, which is trying to give royalties to people who have had their work used without their consent. So this is a real legal issue at the moment. Where do you stand on that? How many of you, the cameras are pointing this way, not at you. So But how many of you have downloaded a PDF of stuff you have to read in class from like Anna's Archive or any of these other like, sites? Yeah, yeah. Don't, you can hold it low because, right? Right. How many of you have downloaded music, like in the old days, like on Napster or whatever when you were a little kid, right? Without paying the artists. Yeah, there, bingo, right? What's the status of that? Right? Because remember, property, contract, and consent. But like, does intellectual property rights fall under the purview of property? Or is it something different? What is the utilitarian argument for copyrights? Does that utilitarian argument hold? These are, because remember, at the end of the day, the reason why we make arguments in a lot of ways is because of the consequences associated with them. So we have to examine the consequences. What tools do we use to examine those consequences? Economics. That's where the rubber hits the road. When we allow that to happen, are we ending up by destroying the very thing that creates the generation of wealth? Or does it actually increase the generation of wealth? Like being able to download free music, has it actually stopped people from making music or actually allowed more people to make more music? How about science? Same thing, right? So anyway, the point here is that what we're trying to show is that Hayek was a scientific observer of the 20th century, right? These periodic massive issues raising these puzzles, and he's trying to come up with a good theory in them. But his theory, the residue of his theory, allows us to see him as a scientific visionary for the 21st century. He is the first complexity theorist. Economics is a science of complex phenomena, not a science of simple phenomena. That matters for the methodology of economics, for the analytical tools we use in economics, and yes, for the social philosophical implications we draw from economics. All right, and so, what I'm trying to do in this book is not bore people to death by telling a story about a guy who lived a long life. All right, but try to excite their minds about what they can do with the puzzles that he worked on for their own puzzles in the way that they are approaching it today. And so that's what we're trying to do in the conclusion, in conclusion of the book. That says conclusion, right?